In the bitter winter of 1879, in the isolated mountain town of Crowhollow, Pennsylvania, 10-year-old Lillian Hartley's impoverished parents make an unthinkable bargain with the town's wealthiest and most mysterious resident, 70-year-old Silas Blackwood. What begins as a horrifying tale of child marriage becomes something far more sinister when Lillian discovers the true reason Blackwood has been collecting young brides for decades and why none of them have ever been seen again after their 13th birthday. The wedding dress was too big for her tiny frame, its yellowed lace trailing behind 10-year-old Lillian Hartley like a shroud as she walked down the aisle of Crowhollow's abandoned church. The 70 candles flickering in the darkness, one for each year of her groom's life, cast dancing shadows that seemed to reach for her with gnarled fingers. But it wasn't the forced marriage that would haunt the witnesses that December night. It was what happened when Lillian lifted her veil and they saw that her eyes had turned completely black, as if something ancient had already begun to claim her from the inside out. 3 weeks earlier, before the horror truly began, Lillian had been nothing more than a hungry child, pressing her face against the frosted window of her family's crumbling cabin, watching the snow fall in thick curtains across the Pennsylvania mountains. Her stomach cramped with a familiar emptiness. They hadn't eaten in 2 days, and her father had already burned most of the furniture to keep them from freezing. "Get away from that window, girl," her mother Margaret Hartley snapped from her position by the dying fire. "You're letting the cold in." Margaret's face had grown gaunt over the harsh winter months, her once pretty features now sharp and desperate. She clutched baby Samuel to her chest, the infant's weak cries barely audible over the howling wind outside. Lillian's 3 other siblings, Thomas, aged 7, Mary, aged 5, and little Emma, a pen's 3, huddled together under a moth-eaten blanket in the corner. "Mama, when will Papa come back?" Mary asked, her lips blue with cold. "Soon," Margaret lied, though she knew James Hartley had been gone for 4 days now, traveling to the valley below in search of work that didn't exist. The mining company had closed 6 months ago, leaving Crowhollow to slowly starve in isolation. Lillian watched her mother's face crumble slightly before hardening again. At 10 years old, Lillian understood more than her mother realized. She knew they were dying, slowly but surely, and that her father's trip was likely futile. The other families in Crowhollow were suffering too, though none quite as badly as the Hartleys, who had always been on the bottom rung of the town's social ladder. That's when they heard it, the sound that would change everything. Bells, not church bells, but the delicate silver bells that adorned Silas Blackwood's black carriage. Every soul in Crowhollow knew that sound, and every soul feared it. Lillian scrambled back to the window, using her sleeve to wipe away the condensation. Through the swirling snow she saw it, the massive black carriage pulled by 4 midnight-colored horses, their breath creating clouds of steam in the frigid air. The carriage was moving slowly up the mountain path, directly toward their cabin. "Mama," Lillian whispered, her voice trembling, "Mr. Blackwood's carriage is coming." Margaret's face went white. She clutched Samuel tighter, causing him to wail. "No," she breathed. "No, no, no." But it was too late. The carriage had stopped directly outside their door. Silas Blackwood was Crowhollow's wealthiest resident, owning the closed mine, most of the land, and the mortgages on nearly every family's home. He lived alone in a massive estate at the peak of the mountain, a Gothic monstrosity that locals called the Black Manor. At 70 years old, he had outlived 6 wives, all of whom had died young under mysterious circumstances. The town whispered about him, about the strange lights seen in his manor at night, about the young women who entered his employ and were never seen again, about his unnatural mortality, despite his advanced age. The knock at the door was soft, almost gentle, but it might as well have been thunder for the fear it instilled. Margaret didn't move. The knock came again. "Mrs. Hartley," came a voice like grinding stone. "I know you're in there. Please, let's discuss this as civilized people." With shaking hands, Margaret set Samuel down in his makeshift crib, a drawer pulled from a broken dresser, and approached the door. She opened it just a crack, but the wind immediately forced it wider, revealing the figure standing on their doorstep. Silas Blackwood was tall and skeletal, his skin stretched tight over his bones like parchment. His eyes were the palest blue Lillian had ever seen, so light they seemed almost white. He wore an expensive black coat with a fur collar, and his silver-headed cane gleamed in the dim light. Despite his age, he stood perfectly straight, and there was something unsettling about the way he moved. Too smooth, too controlled, like a marionette operated by invisible strings. "Mrs. Hartley," he said, removing his top hat to reveal thin white hair combed precisely across his spotted scalp. "May I come in? I have a proposition that could save your family." Margaret's jaw tightened. "We don't need your charity, Mr. Blackwood." He smiled, revealing teeth that were too white, too perfect for a man his age. "Oh, but this isn't charity, my dear. This is business." Before Margaret could refuse, Blackwood had somehow crossed the threshold, bringing with him a cloud of cold that was somehow worse than the winter air outside. He surveyed the pitiful cabin with those pale eyes, taking in the burned furniture, the hungry children, the baby crying weakly in his drawer crib. His gaze finally settled on Lillian. "My," he said softly, "what a beautiful child." Lillian felt her skin crawl. She pressed herself against the wall, trying to become invisible, but his eyes tracked her movement with predatory precision. "Your husband owes me quite a substantial sum," Blackwood continued, though his eyes never left Lillian. "The mortgage on this cabin, the loans he took to feed your family, the credit at the company store before it closed. All told, you owe me, well, more than you could ever hope to repay." "James will find work," Margaret said desperately. "We just need more time." "Time?" Blackwood laughed, a sound like wind through a cemetery. "My dear woman, you don't have time. Look at your children. That infant won't survive another week in this cold. And the others, well, starvation is such an ugly way for children to die." He reached into his coat and pulled out a leather purse, heavy with coins. He set it on the table with a deliberate thunk. $500, he said. "Enough to pay your debts, buy food, fuel, even move somewhere warmer if you choose." Margaret stared at the purse as if it were a venomous snake. "What do you want?" Blackwood's smile widened. "I'm getting older, Mrs. Hartley. I need a new wife. Someone young, someone who can serve my particular needs for the years I have remaining." His eyes returned to Lillian. "I want your daughter." The silence that followed was deafening. Even baby Samuel stopped crying, as if sensing the evil that had entered their home. "She's 10 years old," Margaret whispered, horrified. "Yes," Blackwood agreed. "Old enough to be trained properly, young enough to—" "Get out," Margaret said, her voice growing stronger. "Get out of my house." Blackwood didn't move. "Think carefully, Mrs. Hartley. Without my money, all your children die. With it, 5 of them live. Surely the life of one is worth the lives of 5. And I assure you, Lillian will want for nothing. She'll have the finest clothes, the best food, a warm bed. She'll live like a princess in a monster's castle." Margaret spat. Blackwood's pleasant facade cracked slightly, and for just a moment, Lillian saw something else beneath, something ancient and hungry. "You have until your husband returns to decide. But know this, if you refuse, I'll collect on your debts immediately. You'll be thrown out into the snow before nightfall. How long do you think your children will last out there? Hours? Minutes?" He turned to leave, then paused at the door. "Oh, and Mrs. Hartley, your husband won't find work in the valley. I've made certain of that. Every door is closed to him. He'll return empty-handed, I assure you." With that, he was gone, leaving only the leather purse on the table and the smell of something sulphurous in the air. Margaret collapsed into a chair, sobbing. The younger children, not fully understanding what had transpired, began to cry as well. But Lillian stood frozen, her mind racing. She had understood every word, every implication. She was being sold, like livestock. That night, as her siblings slept fitfully in the cold, Lillian heard her mother praying, bargaining with God for another way. But God, it seemed, wasn't listening to the prayers from Crowhollow anymore. James Hartley returned 2 days later, just as Blackwood had predicted, empty-handed, defeated, and half-frozen. The argument that followed shook the thin walls of the cabin. "We can't," James roared. "She's our daughter, and the others are our children too." Margaret screamed back. "Would you condemn them all to save one? There has to be another way." "What way, James? What way? You couldn't find work. No one will help us. We're going to starve, and when we do, Blackwood will take her anyway. At least this way the others survive." Lillian listened from the loft where she slept, her small body trembling not from cold, but from fear. She thought about running away, but where would she go? The mountain was treacherous in winter, and a child alone wouldn't last a night. The argument continued for hours, with James alternately raging and weeping. But as baby Samuel's cries grew weaker and Mary developed a rattling cough that wouldn't stop, the terrible mathematics of survival began to work on him. On the third night after Blackwood's visit, Lillian was awakened by a hand on her shoulder. Her father stood there, his face haggard and aged beyond his 35 years. "Lillian," he whispered, his voice broken. "We need to talk." She sat up, already knowing what he would say. "Mr. Blackwood, he wants to marry you." "I know, Papa." James flinched. You're just a child. You shouldn't know such things." "But I do." He pulled her into his arms, and she felt his tears on her hair. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I'm so sorry. I've failed you. I've failed as a father, as a man, as everything. Will Mary and Thomas and Emma and Samuel be okay?" Lillian asked in a small voice. "Yes," James choked out. "Yes, they'll live." Lillian nodded against his chest. "Then it's okay, Papa." But it wasn't okay, and they both knew it. The next morning, Silas Blackwood's carriage returned. This time, when he entered the cabin, he was accompanied by Mayor Aldrich and Reverend Cole, witnesses to make the contract legal. The papers were drawn up with careful, legal language that somehow made the monstrous transaction seem civilized. "She'll need a few days to prepare," Margaret said numbly, as James signed the papers with a shaking hand. "3 days," Blackwood agreed. "The wedding will be on Sunday, in the old church. I prefer privacy, so it will be a small affair. Just the necessary witnesses." He counted out the $500 onto the table, each coin ringing like a death knell. Then he turned to Lillian, who stood silent in the corner. "Don't look so frightened, my dear," he said, reaching out to touch her cheek with one cold, papery finger. "You're going to be my special little bride, my 7th and final wife. We're going to do wonderful things together, you and I." Lillian wanted to pull away, but she forced herself to remain still. Up close she could see that Blackwood's pale eyes weren't just light blue, they had flecks of red in them, like drops of blood in milk. 3 days, he repeated, and then he was gone. The family spent those 3 days in a strange state of suspended horror. Margaret used some of the money to buy food and fuel, and for the first time in months, the children ate their fill. But every bite tasted like ash in Lillian's mouth. Her mother began sewing a wedding dress from an old white tablecloth, her fingers working mechanically while tears streamed down her face. Thomas and Mary didn't fully understand what was happening, only that Lillian was going to live in the big house on the mountain. Emma was too young to comprehend anything at all, but at night when they thought Lillian was asleep, she heard her parents whispering. "They say his 6th wife was only 15 when she died," Margaret whispered. "They found her at the bottom of the mountain, frozen solid, but her expression loud. They said she looked terrified, as if she'd dead running from something." "Stop," James said. "And the 5th wife, she lasted 2 years before she threw herself from the tower window. The 4th wife disappeared entirely. Blackwood claimed she ran away, but no one ever saw her again." "Margaret, please. What are we doing, James? What are we condemning her to?" "We're saving the others," James said, but his voice held no conviction. On the morning of the 3rd day, Sunday, December 15th, 1879, Lillian put on the makeshift wedding dress. It was too big, hemmed hastily by her mother's shaking hands. Margaret had tried to make it pretty with some old lace from her own wedding dress, but it only made the garment look more like a shroud. "Remember," Margaret said as she braided Lillian's long brown hair, "be obedient. Don't anger him. Do whatever he says, no matter how strange it seems. Just survive." "Yes, Mama." Margaret's hands stilled. "I love you, Lillian. Never forget that. Whatever happens, I love you." "I know, Mama." The black carriage arrived at noon. Lillian hugged each of her siblings goodbye, lingering longest with baby Samuel, pressing her face against his soft hair and breathing in his baby smell, trying to memorize it. Then she climbed into the carriage, the leather seats cold despite the fur blankets provided. The ride to the old church seemed both endless and far too quick. The church had been abandoned for 5 years, ever since the new one was built closer to town. It sat at the edge of the mountain, surrounded by a graveyard whose headstones jutted from the snow like broken teeth. Inside, candles had been lit, 70 of them, Lillian counted, arranged in precise circles around the altar. The few witnesses, Mayor Aldrich, Reverend Cole, the town doctor, and a handful of others who owed Blackwood money, sat in the front pews, their faces pale and uncomfortable. Blackwood waited at the altar, dressed in a black suit that seemed to absorb light. When he saw Lillian, his thin lips curved into that terrible smile. "My beautiful bride," he said as she approached. "My perfect, unspoiled bride." Reverend Cole performed the ceremony with obvious reluctance, his voice catching on the words. When he asked if anyone objected, the silence was deafening. No one would dare oppose Silas Blackwood. "Do you, Lillian Hartley, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband?" Reverend Cole asked, his eyes pleading with her to run, to refuse, to do anything but answer. Lillian thought of her siblings, warm and fed for the first time in months. "I do," she whispered. "Then by the power vested in me, I pronounce you man and wife." Blackwood leaned down to kiss her, and his lips were colder than winter stone. But it was when he pulled back that the witnesses gasped. Lillian's eyes, which had been a warm brown when she entered the church, had turned completely black, not just the pupils, but the entire eye, as if they had been filled with ink. She blinked, confused by the gasps and whispers, unaware of the change. Blackwood, however, smiled wider. "Perfect," he murmured. "The transformation has already begun." The carriage ride from the abandoned church to Blackwood's estate took them higher up the mountain, along a narrow path that twisted through dense pine forests. Lillian sat rigid beside her new husband, her small hands folded in her lap, trying not to think about the strange reaction of the wedding guests. Several had fled the church immediately after seeing her, though she didn't understand why. "Are you frightened, my dear?" Blackwood asked, his voice cutting through the silence. "No, sir," Lillian lied. He chuckled. "That sound like grinding bones. You will call me Silas now. We are husband and wife after all." The word wife made her stomach turn. She was 10 years old. She still played with corn-husk dolls when she could find the materials. She should be learning to read better, helping her mother with chores, not sitting in a carriage wearing a wedding dress. "Your eyes," Blackwood said suddenly, reaching out to turn her face toward him. His fingers were like ice against her chin. "Do they hurt?" "My eyes." Lillian was confused. "No, sir. Silas." "Good, good. The first wife." She screamed for 3 days when the change began. "But you're special, Lillian. I knew it the moment I saw you." "What changed?" she asked, though part of her didn't want to know. Instead of answering, Blackwood pulled out a small silver mirror from his coat pocket and held it up to her face. Lillian gasped. Her eyes, which had always been the same warm brown as her father's, were now completely black. Not just dark, but black like spilled ink, like the space between stars, like the depths of a well at midnight. She reached up to touch her face, certain it must be some trick of the mirror, but the reflection moved with her, "What did you do to me?" she whispered. "I did nothing, child. You did this yourself, simply by saying I do. You see, the manor requires a very specific type of mistress. My previous wives, they weren't strong enough. Their bodies rejected the change, fought against it. But you," he traced a finger along her cheek, and she shuddered. "You're accepting it, embracing it, even if you don't realize it yet." The carriage lurched to a stop, and Lillian looked out to see the Black Manor for the first time up close. She'd seen it from the town below. Of course, everyone in Crowhollow had. It sat at the highest point of the mountain like a cancerous growth, all twisted spires and dark windows. But being here, at its gates, was different. The manor was wrong in ways that hurt to perceive. Its angles didn't quite make sense, as if the architect had been following instructions from a fever dream. Windows were placed in positions that shouldn't exist, and shadows fell in directions that defied the pale winter sun. The stone itself seemed to pulse slightly, like the slow breathing of some massive, sleeping beast. "Welcome home, Mrs. Blackwood," Silas said, and the iron gates swung open without anyone touching them. The interior was worse than the exterior. While lavishly decorated with Persian rugs, crystal chandeliers, and oil paintings in gilded frames, everything felt slightly off. The paintings depicted scenes that changed when Lillian wasn't looking directly at them. A woman in a green dress would be smiling in one glance, screaming in the next. The shadows didn't match the furniture that cast them. And there was a smell, underneath the polish and perfume, something sweet and rotten, like flowers left too long in a tomb. "Mrs. Crane," Blackwood called out, and an elderly woman emerged from the shadows, so suddenly that Lillian jumped. The woman was ancient, her face a map of wrinkles, her hair white as bone. But her eyes were sharp and knowing. "Master Blackwood," she said, her voice creaking like old floorboards. "I see you've brought the 7th. Indeed, Lillian, this is Mrs. Crane, the housekeeper. She'll show you to your rooms and explain your duties." "Duties?" Lillian asked, but Blackwood was already walking away, his cane clicking on the marble floor. "Come, child," Mrs. Crane said, not unkindly. "Best you see your quarters before dark. The manor is different after sunset." She led Lillian up a grand staircase that seemed to go on longer than it should, past portraits of women, 6 of them, Lillian counted, Blackwood's previous wives. They were all young, all beautiful, and all had the same expression in their paintings, a mixture of fear and resignation. "That was Constance," Mrs. Crane said, noticing Lillian's attention. "The first wife. She lasted the longest, almost 3 years. The transformation nearly took with her, but in the end, she shook her head." "What transformation?" Lillian asked. "My eyes are just the beginning, child, but we'll not speak of that now. Here, your rooms." She opened a door to reveal a suite that would have been beautiful if it weren't so unsettling. The furniture was all antique, expensive, but covered in dust as if it hadn't been disturbed in years. The bed was massive, with curtains of deep red velvet that reminded Lillian uncomfortably of blood. And the mirrors, there were so many mirrors, on every wall, even the ceiling above the bed. "Why are there so many mirrors?" Lillian asked. Mrs. Crane's expression darkened. "The master likes to watch," she said simply. "Now let me explain the rules. You must follow them exactly if you wish to survive." The word survive hung in the air like a threat. "First, you must never leave your rooms after midnight. No matter what you hear, what you see, what calls to you, you do not leave these rooms. What happens after midnight? The master conducts his work. Ancient work. Work that requires sacrifice." Lillian shivered. "What kind of work?" Mrs. Crane ignored the question. "Second, you must never go to the east wing of the manor. It's locked, but sometimes the locks fail. If you see the door open, you run the other way." "What's in the east wing?" "The previous wives," Mrs. Crane said flatly. "Or what's left of them." Lillian's blood turned cold. "But they died. They're buried in the town cemetery." Mrs. Crane laughed. A bitter sound. Child, those graves hold nothing but stones and dirt. The master keeps his wives, all of them. Before Lillian could ask more questions, Mrs. Crane continued with the rules. Don't eat anything not prepared by her. Don't look too long into the mirrors at night. Don't listen to the voices that would start whispering her name. Don't trust the servants who came and went. They weren't entirely human anymore. And most importantly, Mrs. Crane said, grasping Lillian's shoulders with surprising strength, when your 13th birthday comes, you must be ready. Ready for what? The completion. The reason he takes child brides. On your 13th birthday, the transformation will complete, and you'll become what he needs you to become. A vessel. A vessel for what? Mrs. Crane's eyes were full of pity. For her, the one he's trying to bring back, his true wife, dead these 100 years. He thinks if he can find the right girl, transform her properly, her spirit can return, possess the body. The previous 6 wives, their bodies couldn't handle the possession. They died or went mad. But you? She studied Lillian's black eyes. You might be different. That first night in the Black Manor was the longest of Lillian's life. She lay in the massive bed, surrounded by mirrors that reflected her image into infinity, and listened to the house come alive. Because that's what it did after midnight. It lived. She heard footsteps in the hallways, but not normal footsteps. These sounded wet, dragging, as if someone were pulling themselves along the floor. She heard singing, a woman's voice, beautiful but wrong, the words in a language that hurt her ears. She heard scratching inside the walls like fingernails on wood, and whispers that seemed to come from the mirrors themselves. Lillian, the voices called. Little Lillian, come play with us. We're so lonely, so cold. Come to the East Wing. Come see what you'll become. She pulled the covers over her head and pressed her hands to her ears, but the voices found their way in anyway. At one point, she was certain she felt someone sit on the edge of her bed, the mattress dipping under invisible weight. A cold hand touched her face through the blanket, and a woman's voice, different from the others, whispered, "You're too young, just like I was. Run, child. Run before it's too late." But where could she run? She was married now, legally bound to Blackwood, and even if she escaped, her family would have to return the money, and her siblings would starve. The next morning, Mrs. Crane brought her breakfast porridge and tea that tasted of bitter herbs. "Drink all of it," the old woman insisted. "It will help with the changes." "I don't want to change," Lillian said. "Want has nothing to do with it, child. The moment you entered this house as his wife, the transformation began. The tea will make it less painful." Over the following days, Lillian learned the routine of the Black Manor. During daylight hours, it was almost normal. Blackwood largely ignored her, spending his time in his study conducting what he called his research. She was given lessons by Mrs. Crane, not in reading or arithmetic, but in stranger subjects. How to draw chalk circles that would keep certain things out. Words in Latin and older languages that would stop the whispers for a while. The proper way to burn sage and salt. Protection, Mrs. Crane explained. You'll need it. But it was the nights that were truly terrible. Each sunset, Lillian would retreat to her rooms, lock the door, though she suspected locks meant nothing in this house, and wait. The haunting would begin at midnight exactly, growing worse each night. On the 5th night, she saw them in the mirrors, the previous wives. They stood behind her reflection, pale and translucent, their faces twisted in eternal screams. Constance was there, the first wife, her neck bent at an unnatural angle. Elizabeth II had black marks around her throat as if she'd been strangled. The 3rd, 4th, 5th and 6th, all bearing the wounds of their deaths, all reaching toward Lillian with desperate, grasping fingers. "Join us," they mouthed, no sound emerging from their spectral lips. "Join us before it's too late." On the 7th night, exactly 1 week after her wedding, Blackwood finally came to her rooms. Lillian woke to find him standing at the foot of her bed, illuminated by moonlight. In his hands, He held a leather-bound book that seemed to pulse with its own dark energy. "It's time for the next phase," he said. "Please," Lillian whispered. "I want to go home. You are home. And soon, you'll understand your purpose." He opened the book, and the pages were not paper, but something that looked disturbingly like human skin. "You see, Lillian, my first wife, my real wife, not these substitutes, was named Lenore. She was beautiful, brilliant, and she understood the old ways. Together, we discovered things that mankind was not meant to know. We found ways to extend life, to cheat death itself." He began to read from the book in a language that predated Latin, and Lillian felt something stirring inside her, something foreign and ancient, but Lenore was ambitious. She wanted more than just long life. She wanted true immortality. She attempted a ritual, one that would have made her a god. But something went wrong. Her body died, but her spirit became trapped between worlds. The air in the room grew cold, and frost began forming on the mirrors. In their surfaces, Lillian saw not her reflection but another woman, beautiful and terrible, with wild dark hair and eyes like burning coals. "For 100 years I've been trying to bring her back," Blackwood continued. "I need a vessel, a young, pure vessel, whose body can be properly prepared to house her spirit. The previous wives failed, because they were too old, too formed, but a child's body and spirit, are still malleable. And you, Lillian, you're perfect. Your body is accepting the transformation without resistance." "No," Lillian whimpered, but she couldn't move. The words he was reading held her paralyzed. "By your 13th birthday, you'll be ready. Your body will have changed enough to hold her, and then my Lenore will live again in you. You should be honored. You'll be the vessel for a goddess." In the mirrors, Lenore's image grew clearer, and she was smiling, a predatory, hungry smile that promised nothing but horror. The days following Blackwood's revelation blurred together in a nightmare of strange lessons and increasingly disturbing changes to Lillian's body. Her black eyes were only the beginning. Her skin grew paler each day, taking on an almost translucent quality where she could see the blue veins beneath like rivers on a map. Her hair, once brown like autumn leaves, began developing streaks of pure white, as if she were aging rapidly in specific places while remaining a child everywhere else. But it was the hunger that disturbed her most. It started exactly 2 weeks after the wedding. Lillian woke one morning with a gnawing emptiness in her stomach that the porridge and tea couldn't satisfy. She ate everything Mrs. Crane brought her, but the hunger only grew worse. "It's natural," Mrs. Crane said when Lillian complained. "Your body is changing, requiring different sustenance." "What kind of sustenance?" Mrs. Crane didn't answer, but that evening she brought a different meal. Raw meat, barely seared on the outside, blood pooling on the plate. "I can't eat this," Lillian protested. "You can and you will. Your body needs it now." To Lillian's horror, the smell of the blood made her mouth water. She picked up the fork with trembling hands and took a small bite. The taste exploded across her tongue. Rich, metallic, perfect. She devoured the entire piece in minutes, then licked the blood from the plate, while Miss Crane watched with sad eyes. "What's happening to me?" Lillian asked, tears streaming down her face even as she craved more. "You're becoming what he needs you to become." "I'm sorry, child. I'm so very sorry." That night, Lillian discovered another change. She could see in the dark now, perfectly, as if the darkness were merely another kind of light. She watched from her window as Blackwood emerged from the manor at midnight, making his way to a building she hadn't noticed before. A stone structure that looked like a small temple or mausoleum, hidden among the trees. Curiosity overcame fear. Despite Miss Crane's warnings about leaving her room after midnight, Lillian slipped out into the hallway. The house was different in the dark hours, the walls seeming to breathe, the paintings watching her pass with living eyes. She heard the whispers of the dead wives following her, but she ignored them drawn by an inexplicable pull toward that stone building. She crept through the manor's main hall, past the library where books flew off shelves on their own, past the dining room where invisible diners seemed to be having a feast. She could hear the clink of silverware, the murmur of conversation, though the room appeared empty. The front door opened at her touch, though she knew it should have been locked. The path to the stone building was lit by a moon that seemed too large, too bright. The snow crunched under her bare feet, but she felt no cold. As she approached the structure, she heard chanting in that ancient language Blackwood used, and saw candlelight flickering through cracks in the stone. There was a small window, grimy with age. Lillian peered through and immediately wished she had. The interior was a circular chamber, with symbols carved into every surface, symbols that hurt to look at, that seemed to writhe and change when observed directly. In the center was a stone altar, and on that altar lay a body, a young woman, perhaps 20 years old, whom Lillian recognized as one of the servants who had disappeared last week. Blackwood stood over the body, that ancient book open before him. But he wasn't alone. Around him stood figures in hooded robes, but when the hoods shifted, Lillian saw that the faces beneath weren't entirely human. They were wrong, features slightly out of place, too many teeth, eyes that reflected light like a cat. "Brothers and sisters," Blackwood intoned, "we gather again to feed the transformation, to strengthen the vessel." He raised a curved blade that gleamed with an oily iridescence, and Lillian had to clamp her hand over her mouth to keep from screaming as he brought it down. But what happened next was worse than the violence. The woman on the altar wasn't dead. She gasped, her eyes flying open, and Blackwood held a golden chalice to catch what flowed from her. "The vessel must taste death to house the dead," he chanted, and the hooded figures repeated it. "The vessel must know darkness to bring back the Dark One." He lifted the chalice, and Lillian knew with horrible certainty what it contained and where it was going. This was the source of her new hunger, the reason for her body's changes. She'd been drinking blood in her tea, eating flesh in her meals, being transformed from the inside out. She stumbled backward, her foot snapping a twig. Instantly, all the hooded heads turned toward the window. "The vessel watches," one of them hissed, its voice like grinding glass. "Let her," Blackwood said calmly. "She needs to understand what she's becoming." Lillian ran. She ran through the snow, through the manor doors, up the stairs, and into her room, slamming the door behind her. But she could still hear Blackwood's voice, carried on an impossible wind. "You cannot run from what you are becoming, my dear. You are already more us than them." She collapsed on her bed, sobbing, but no tears came. Another change. She could no longer cry. The next morning, Blackwood visited her at breakfast. He sat across from her as she reluctantly ate the bloody meat Mrs. Crane provided, watching her with those pale eyes. "You saw the ritual," he said. "It wasn't a question." Lillian nodded, unable to speak. "Good. It's time you understood the full scope of what's happening. You see, Lenore wasn't just my wife. She was a member of an ancient order, one that predates Christianity, predates civilization as your kind knows it. We are the servants of the outer dark, and we serve entities that existed before the stars were born." "Demons," Lillian whispered. Blackwood laughed. Such a simple word for something so complex. "Not demons. Older things, hungrier things." Lenore was to be their gateway into this world, but the ritual failed. Her spirit is trapped between dimensions, and only a properly prepared vessel can bring her back. "Why me?" "Because you have the bloodline." "Oh, you didn't know?" "Your grandmother, your father's mother, she was one of us. Diluted, weakened by generations of mixing with common blood, but still there. It's why your body accepts the changes so readily. You're coming home, Lillian, becoming what you were always meant to be." "My grandmother was normal," Lillian protested. "She made quilts and told stories. Did she, or did she whisper strange rhymes that made you sleep when nightmares came? Did her quilts have patterns that hurt to look at, too long? Did her stories involve things that should not be?" Lillian's mind raced, remembering her grandmother, who had died when she was 6. The old woman had indeed been strange, talking to people who weren't there, drawing symbols in the dirt that she quickly erased. Her father had said she was going senile, but now, your father knew, Blackwood continued. Why do you think he was so reluctant to give you to me? Not just paternal love. He knew what you might become in my hands, but hunger and desperation override even the deepest fears. Over the next month, the transformation accelerated. Lillian grew 3 inches, though she remained thin as a ray. Her teeth became sharper, capable of tearing through raw meat with ease. She could hear conversations from rooms away, smell emotions. Fear smelled like copper, anger like sulfur, sadness like rain on stone. And she began to see Lenore everywhere, not just in mirrors now, but in shadows, in the corner of her eye, in dreams that felt more real than waking. Lenore would speak to her, her voice like honey laced with poison. Soon, little vessel, Lenore would whisper, soon we will be one. You'll cease to exist, and I will live again. But don't worry, it won't hurt. You'll simply fade away, like a dream upon waking. Lillian tried to resist, tried to maintain her sense of self, but it was like holding water in cupped hands. Each day she felt less like Lillian Hartley, and more like something else, something in between. One night, 3 months after the wedding, Mrs. Crane came to her room with something hidden beneath her apron. I shouldn't do this, the old woman said, but you remind me of my own daughter, lost to the master 60 years ago. She pulled out a small vial filled with clear liquid. This won't stop the transformation, nothing can now, but it will give you a chance. A chance for what? To maintain yourself when Lenore tries to possess you, to fight back on your 13th birthday, when the ritual is complete. Drink this. It will anchor your spirit to your body. Find it harder for her to push you out. Why are you helping me? Mrs. Crane's eyes were wet with tears. She could still shed. Because I've served this monster for 6 decades. Watched 6 innocent girls die or worse. I cannot save you, child, but perhaps I can give you a weapon. She also gave Lillian something else. A letter. This came for you, from your family. Lillian's hands shook as she opened it. Her mother's cramped handwriting filled the page. My dearest Lillian, I pray this letter reaches you. We think of you every day. Your sacrifice has saved us. Samuel is healthy and strong. Thomas found work at the mill that reopened. Mary and Emma are learning to read. We have food, warmth, hope. But at what cost? I wake each night screaming your name. Your father has aged 10 years in 3 months. We saved the other children's bodies, but lost our souls. I know what Blackwood is. I've heard the stories, the whispers. I know what happens to his wives. Forgive me, my daughter. Forgive a mother who chose 5 children over 1, who made an impossible choice. If you can, run. We will survive without his money now. Run and never look back. Your loving mother. Lillian clutched the letter to her chest, feeling something she thought she'd lost. Hope. But it was a bitter hope, because she knew she couldn't run. The transformation had gone too far. She could no longer eat normal food, could no longer stand sunlight for more than minutes at a time. She was becoming something that couldn't exist in the normal world. That night, she was awakened by screaming. Not the usual ghostly wails of the dead wives, but something immediate, visceral. She crept to her window and saw lights in the town below, torches, many of them, moving up the mountain path toward the manor. She heard Blackwood in the hallway, his voice angry. The fools! Do they think their pitchforks and prayers can stop what's coming? Miss Crane burst into Lillian's room. The townspeople, she gasped. They've had enough. Children have been disappearing and they've finally connected it to the master. They're coming to burn the manor. For a moment, Lillian felt hope. Perhaps they could save her, end this nightmare. But then Blackwood appeared in her doorway, his face twisted with rage. You think they've come to save you? He snarled. They've come to burn you, child. You're no longer human enough for their mercy. You're an abomination in their eyes now. He grabbed her arm with inhuman strength, dragging her to the window. In the torchlight below, She could see faces she recognized: Mayor Aldrich, Reverend Cole, even some of her parents' friends. Their faces were set with determination and fear. "Shall we show them what they're really dealing with?" Blackwood asked, and began to chant in that ancient tongue. The change was immediate and horrifying. The hooded figures from the stone temple emerged from the shadows of the forest, but now their hoods were thrown back, revealing their true forms. They were indeed once human, but transformed into something else: skin like leather, mouths full of razor teeth, fingers extended into claws. They fell upon the townspeople with savage hunger. The screams that filled the night were beyond description. Lillian watched in horror as people she'd known her whole life were torn apart, their torches falling into the snow, extinguished like their lives. "You see," Blackwood said calmly as the massacre continued below, "this is the power you'll wield when Lenore completes her return. You'll be a goddess of death and darkness." But among the fleeing townspeople, Lillian saw a familiar figure: her father, James Hartley. He'd come with the mob, perhaps hoping to save her, or at least see her one last time. She watched as one of the creatures cornered him against a tree. "No," she screamed, and something burst from within her. Not Lenore's presence, but something else, something that was purely Lillian, but enhanced by all the changes. She felt power flow through her, dark and terrible, but hers to command. The creature attacking her father suddenly burst into black flames, shrieking as it was consumed. James looked up at the manor, and even from this distance, their eyes met. She saw recognition, horror, and heartbreak in his gaze, before he turned and ran. Blackwood studied her with new interest. "Fascinating. You're developing abilities independent of Lenore. You're even more special than I thought." The massacre of the townspeople marked a turning point. Crowhollow became a ghost town almost overnight. The few survivors fled down the mountain, spreading tales of horror that would be dismissed as mass hysteria by the outside world. But those who remained, the broken, the desperate, the mad, they fell under Blackwood's complete control. Lillian watched from her window as the town transformed. The abandoned houses became nests for the transformed creatures that served Blackwood. The church where she'd been married was desecrated, its cross inverted, its altar stained with things that weren't wine. And at night the entire valley echoed with inhuman howls and the screams of whatever poor souls the creatures dragged back to the manor. Miss Crane grew more desperate in her attempts to prepare Lillian for what was coming. Her 13th birthday was only 6 months away now, and the old woman knew time was running short. "You must understand," she said one evening, bringing Lillian another vial of the clear liquid. "This is extract of wolfsbane mixed with water, blessed by a true priest. Not that charlatan Reverend Cole, but a real man of God, who died 50 years ago. I've been saving it. Why do you stay?" Lillian asked. "Why not run?" Miss Crane pulled down her collar, revealing a black mark on her neck, a symbol that seemed to writhe under scrutiny. "I'm bound, child. I made a deal with the master when I was young and foolish. My daughter was dying of fever, and he promised to save her. He did, but the price was my eternal servitude. Even death won't free me. I've tried." She showed Lillian scars on her wrists, her throat. "Each time I wake again, healed but still bound. But you might have a chance to break free, or at least to maintain enough of yourself to resist." The transformation continued relentlessly. By the 4th month, Lillian no longer looked 10 years old. Her body had stretched and changed, giving her the appearance of someone closer to 15, though thin and otherworldly. Her white-streaked hair now moved on its own sometimes, floating as if underwater. Her black eyes could see through walls when she concentrated, and she could hear the thoughts of the weak-minded. It was during this time that she made a terrible discovery. Unable to sleep one night, she needed less and less sleep as the transformation progressed. Lillian decided to explore the manor more thoroughly. She'd learned to move silently, to blend with shadows in ways that seemed impossible. The creatures that roamed the halls at night, no longer bothered her. They recognized her as something becoming like them. She found herself drawn to the east wing, the one Mrs. Crane had warned her about. The door that should have been locked stood open, hanging off its hinges, as if something had forced its way out, or in. The corridor beyond was different from the rest of the manor. The walls were covered in what looked like organic material, black, pulsing veins that reminded Lillian uncomfortably of her own increasingly visible circulatory system. The air was thick, humid, and smelled of copper and decay. She followed the corridor to its end, where it opened into a vast circular chamber she was certain couldn't exist within the manor's architecture. It was too big, extending too far. The walls were lined with glass cases, 7 of them, each containing a figure, the previous wives, but they weren't dead. Not exactly. Each woman was suspended in some kind of clear fluid, their eyes open and aware. They were all transformed, like Lillian was becoming pale, elongated, wrong. But there was something else. Their bodies were occupied. Lillian could see shadows moving beneath their skin, dark things that pressed against the flesh from within, trying to escape. She approached the first case, labeled Constance Failed Integration. Year 3. Constance's eyes tracked Lillian's movement, and her mouth opened in the fluid, releasing no bubbles because she no longer breathed. But Lillian heard her voice, in her mind. He keeps us alive to study the failures, to perfect the process. Each of us holds a fragment of Lenore, but our bodies rejected her. We're conscious, always conscious, feeling her inside us, eating us slowly from within. Lillian moved to the next case. Elizabeth, partial possession. Year 2. Elizabeth's face was constantly shifting between 2 expressions, her own terror and something else's cruel smile. She's in me, Elizabeth's mental voice screamed. Not all of her, just enough to make me aware of what I could have become. We're test subjects. Practice runs for you. Each wife had a similar story. They were kept in these tanks, preserved in a state between life and death, their bodies serving as prisons for fragments of Lenore's spirit that had been successfully transferred but hadn't fully taken hold. The 7th case stood empty, waiting. A placard already bore a name, Lillian, perfect vessel, year 1. No, Lillian whispered, backing away. Oh yes, came Blackwood's voice from behind her. She spun to find him standing in the doorway, not angry, but pleased. I wanted you to see this, to understand the honor that awaits you. This is torture. This is science, he corrected. Each failure taught me something. Constance showed me the body must be young. Elizabeth proved the bloodline was necessary. The others refined the process. The right potions, the right rituals, the right amount of the original flesh. Original flesh? Blackwood smiled. That terrible smile. Did you think the meat you've been eating was merely animal? Lenore's original body, preserved through dark alchemy, has been feeding you. You're literally becoming her cell by cell. Lillian fell to her knees, retching, but nothing came up. Her body wouldn't reject what it had already integrated. In 2 months, on your 13th birthday, the stars will align properly for the first time in a century. The barrier between dimensions will be at its thinnest. Lenore will slide from her prison between worlds directly into you. But unlike these failures, he gestured to the suspended wives, you won't resist. You can't. You're already more her than yourself. That night, Lillian attempted suicide for the first time. She threw herself from the tower window, the same one the 5th wife had jumped from, but instead of dying, she floated gently to the ground. Lenore's presence cushioning her fall. Silly girl, Lenore's voice echoed in her mind. You cannot die. I won't let you. We're too close now. She tried poison. Mrs. Crane reluctantly provided it, knowing it wouldn't work but understanding Lillian needed to try. The poison turned to honey in her throat. She tried fire, but the flames felt like warm bathwater. Each failed attempt only proved how far gone she was. But it was during her research into ways to die that Lillian found something else in Blackwood's library, a journal hidden behind other books, written in Lenore's own hand from before her death. The entries started normally enough, documenting her studies into the occult. But as Lillian read, she discovered something Blackwood had never mentioned. Lenore had been pregnant when she attempted the ritual that killed her. The final entry, written hours before her death, was chilling. Silas doesn't know about the child. He wouldn't understand. This ritual isn't just for immortality. It's for transcendence. I will become something beyond human, and our child will be born a god. If something goes wrong, if I become trapped, I've left instructions in the place. Silas will never look. Within my own corpse, the child's spirit is bound to mine. Where I go, it follows. Who I become, it becomes. We are one. Lillian's mind raced. If Lenore possessed her completely, would this unborn child's spirit also transfer? What would that mean? She was only about to turn 13. Her body, even transformed, couldn't possibly. But then she remembered the rapid physical changes, how she appeared older than her years now. The transformation wasn't just preparing her to house Lenore. It was preparing her to carry something else. She confronted Mrs. Crane with the journal. The old woman went pale. I suspected but never knew for certain. There were rumors that Lenore was with child when she died. If that's true, God help us all. A child born of possession, neither living nor dead, neither human nor other. It would be an abomination beyond imagination. How do I stop this? You can't stop it, but maybe you can change it. Mrs. Crane pulled out an ancient book of her own, one she'd hidden beneath loose floorboards. This contains the original ritual Lenore attempted. If you study it, understand it, perhaps you can find a flaw, a way to turn it against itself. Lillian spent every waking moment studying both Lenore's journal and the ritual book. She learned that the possession required the host's consent at the crucial moment, not verbal, but spiritual. The host had to, on some level, accept the incoming spirit. The previous wives had all said yes, broken by torture or desperation or false promises. But what if she said no? What if, at the crucial moment, she rejected Lenore completely? It would destroy you, Mrs. Crane warned. The magical energies involved rejecting them would tear you apart. Better to die as myself than live as her. But Blackwood, perhaps sensing her newfound determination, began to tighten his control. He moved her to a new room, one with no windows, no mirrors. She could break for weapons. He stationed creatures outside her door. And worse, he began to visit her nightly, sitting in a chair beside her bed, reading from that horrible book, weakening her will with each word. Your parents think you're dead, he told her one night. I sent them proof, a finger, one you'll regenerate soon enough. They held a funeral, empty casket of course, but they mourned you. They've moved away, started fresh. You're forgotten, Lillian. You exist only here, only for this purpose. It was a lie. She could feel it, but it hurt nonetheless. As her 13th birthday approached, the manor began to change. The walls bled a black substance that smelled of iron and sulfur. The creatures grew more agitated, more hungry, and the suspended wives in the east wing began to scream, not audibly, but psychically, their mental shrieks echoing through the house. 3 nights before her birthday, Lillian was awakened by a different presence in her room. Not Blackwood, not the creatures, but something else, a shadow that shouldn't exist, standing in the corner where no light could reveal it. Who are you? She whispered. The shadow moved closer, and she could make out a vague shape, a woman, but not Lenore. This presence felt different, sadder, older. I am what Lenore killed to begin her journey into darkness, the shadow said, its voice like wind through empty halls. Her mother, she sacrificed me for power, used my blood to open her first gateway. I've been watching, waiting, bound to her, as surely as you are. Can you help me? I can tell you a truth Silas doesn't know. Lenore isn't trying to possess you to live again. She's trying to possess you to die properly. She's been trapped between worlds for a century, neither living nor dead, experiencing constant agony. She wants oblivion but can't achieve it without a physical form to die in. If she possesses you completely, she plans to kill you both, finally ending her torment. But the child's spirit would be released into the world without a vessel, without control. It would become something far worse than any demon, a god without form, without limits, without mercy. The shadow began to fade as footsteps approached. "There is another way," it whispered urgently. "Don't reject her, trap her. Become the prison she never escapes. It means living forever with her inside you, fighting for control every moment. But it would prevent the greater catastrophe." Blackwood entered, and the shadow vanished completely. "Talking to yourself, my dear, or has Lenore's presence grown strong enough for conversation? No matter. Tomorrow we begin the final preparations. Your birthday will be memorable. The morning of December 15th, 1880, exactly 1 year after her wedding and her 13th birthday, Lillian woke to find her room transformed. The walls were covered in symbols drawn in what looked like blood, but smelled of something far older. Candles floated in mid-air, their flames burning black, and in every corner, shadows moved independently of any light source. Miss Crane entered with her final meal as Lillian Hartley. After tonight she would either be dead, possessed, or something else entirely. The old woman's hands shook as she set down the tray. "I've added the wolfsbane extract to your tea," she whispered. "All of it. It won't stop what's coming, but it might give you enough strength to do what you must." Hidden beneath the plate was something else, a small silver knife, its blade inscribed with symbols that hurt to look at. "If all else fails," Mrs. Crane said, "this blade can cut spirit as well as flesh. It was blessed by saints and cursed by demons. It exists between worlds, like you do now. Why are you helping me?" Lillian asked one final time. "Because 60 years ago, I was you. I was meant to be the vessel. But I was too old, 15 when Blackwood took me. The possession failed, but not before I felt Lenore inside my mind. The violation of it, the wrongness. No child should experience that. I couldn't save the others, but perhaps I can save you." Miss Crane pulled her into a fierce hug. The first human contact Lillian had felt in months that wasn't Blackwood's cold touch. "Be strong, child. Be stronger than all of us were." The day passed in a blur of preparation. Blackwood had her bathed in water mixed with ground bone and mercury, dressed in a gown made from funeral shrouds, her hair braided with black ribbons that seemed to whisper when they moved. He painted her skin with more symbols, each one burning like ice as it dried. "You're perfect," he kept saying, circling her like a predator. "Absolutely perfect." As the sun set, he led her not to the stone temple but to a chamber she'd never seen before. Deep beneath the manor, accessed through a door that hadn't existed until today. The stairs descended far deeper than should have been possible, and the temperature rose rather than fell as they went down. The chamber at the bottom was vast, its walls carved from black stone that sweated some viscous substance. In the center was a circle drawn in salt and ash, surrounded by 7 altars, one for each previous wife, and on each altar, Lillian gasped. The wives were there, removed from their tanks, laid out on the stone. They were still alive, still aware, their eyes following her movement. "They'll anchor the ritual," Blackwood explained. "Their partial possessions will draw Lenore's complete spirit into you. Their suffering will power the transformation." The hooded figures were already there, dozens of them, more than Lillian had ever seen. They chanted in that ancient tongue, their voices creating harmonies that shouldn't exist, sounds that made reality ripple like water. In the center of the circle stood a mirror, but not just any mirror. It was made from polished obsidian, and within its surface, Lillian could see not her reflection but Lenore, waiting, pacing like a caged animal. "It's time," Blackwood said, guiding Lillian to stand before the mirror. The chanting grew louder. The symbols on the walls began to glow. The wives on the altars started to convulse, their mouths open in silent screams. Blackwood began the incantation, his voice cutting through all other sounds. From death to life, from dark to darker still, from flesh to flesh, from will to stronger will, the vessel stands prepared, the gateway opens wide. Let she who waits beyond now crawl inside. The mirror began to crack, not break, but crack, like ice under spring sun. Through the cracks, something started to seep, not liquid, but presence, spirit, essence. Lenore was coming. Lillian felt her immediately, pressing against her mind like fingers against glass. The spirit was ancient, powerful, and absolutely insane from a century of torment. But there was something else there too, smaller, quieter, but somehow more terrifying. The unborn child's spirit, attached to its mother like a parasite. "Accept her," Blackwood commanded. "Say yes, Lillian. Become my Lenore." This was the moment, the crucial instant where she had to choose, and Lillian made a choice that no one expected. She didn't say yes. She didn't say no. She said, "Come in, Lenore, but know this: you enter my prison, not your freedom." Using everything Mrs. Crane had taught her, everything she'd learned from the books, and the strength from the wolfsbane extract. Lillian didn't resist the possession, she redirected it. Instead of letting Lenore push her consciousness out, she pulled Lenore's consciousness in, creating not a replacement, but a fusion. The result was agony beyond description. Two souls, two minds, trying to occupy the same space. Lenore shrieked in rage as she realized what was happening. "What are you doing?" Both Blackwood and Lenore screamed simultaneously. "What your mother suggested," Lillian gasped through the pain. "I'm becoming your eternal prison." But something went wrong. The child's spirit, that small dark presence, didn't enter Lillian, with its mother trapped. It broke free, shooting out into the room like a ball of dark energy. It struck the nearest target, Blackwood himself. The old man's eyes went wide as the spirit invaded him. His body began to change immediately, but not in the controlled way Lillian's had. This was violent, wrong. His flesh bubbled and reformed, his bones cracking and extending. "No," he gasped. This isn't possible." "Your child, Lenore," Lillian said, though her voice was now layered with Lenore's own. "The child you never told him about. It's found its father." What had been Blackwood continued to transform, becoming something that violated the laws of nature. Not man, not creature, but something between, something that shouldn't exist. The unborn spirit, having never known life, didn't know how to inhabit it properly. It was trying to be born through Blackwood, but he was wrong. Wrong gender, wrong age, wrong species now. The hooded figures backed away in terror. Even they hadn't foreseen this. The thing that had been Blackwood turned to Lillian Lenore with eyes that held too much intelligence and not enough sanity. "Mother," it said in a voice like breaking bells. "Father, we are family now. Twisted, broken, but family." That's when the suspended wives began to laugh. All 6 of them, their psychic laughter echoing through the chamber. They had seen the cosmic joke of it all. Blackwood's century of planning undone by the very thing he'd tried to bring back. "You wanted your wife back." Constance's voice rang out. "You got your whole family instead." The transformation was affecting more than just Blackwood. The manor itself began to change, infected by the unborn's chaotic energy. Walls became flesh, floors became bone, ceilings wept blood. The house was becoming alive, becoming the body the unborn spirit truly needed. Lillian felt Lenore raging inside her, trying to break free, but the wolfsbane had done its job. The 2 souls were locked together, neither able to overcome the other. She pulled out the silver knife Mrs. Crane had given her. "I can end this," she said, raising the blade to her throat. "I die, you die. The child dies with its parents." "No!" The Blackwood thing lunged forward, but its new form was clumsy, uncoordinated. "We are eternal. We are divine. That's when Mrs. Crane appeared in the doorway, but she was different. The mark on her neck was glowing, and her eyes held a power Lillian had never seen before. "You forgot, Silas," the old woman said, "that I've been here 60 years. 60 years of preparing for this moment. 60 years of slowly corrupting your rituals, changing symbols when you weren't looking, adding my own touches to your grand design." She pulled out a vial of liquid that glowed with soft white light. "Holy water, real holy water, blessed by a true saint, mixed with my own blood, the blood of one who survived partial possession. It won't kill any of you, but it will seal you." She threw the vial into the center of the circle. It shattered, and the liquid spread impossibly far, covering the floor, the walls, creating a barrier that began to solidify like crystal. No, the Blackwood thing tried to escape, but the crystallization was too fast. It caught him mid-transformation, freezing him in his monstrous state. The wives on the altars smiled as the crystal covered them, finally granting them the peace of immobility if not death. Lillian felt the crystal climbing her legs, and she made a decision. She could fight it, possibly escape with her transformed body, and Lenora trapped within, or she could accept it, become a statue, a warning, an eternal prison for the spirit inside her. "Mrs. Crane," she called out, "tell my family I loved them. Tell them I saved them twice, once with my sacrifice, once with my choice." The old woman nodded, tears streaming down her face. "I will, child. I promise." As the crystal covered her, Lillian felt Lenora's fury turn to despair. They were both trapped now, forever, neither living nor dead, neither free nor fully imprisoned, but the world was safe from what they could have become. The last thing Lillian saw before the crystal covered her eyes was Mrs. Crane pulling out a match. The old woman was going to burn the manor, trap everything in crystal and flame. But that's not where the story ends. The year was 1980, exactly 1 century after Lillian's 13th birthday. The ruins of the Black Manor had become a legend, a place where teenagers dared each other to spend the night, where ghost hunters came with their equipment and left with nothing but static and fear. Sarah Mitchell, a graduate student in archaeology, had come to study the ruins for her thesis on folk horror in American history. She'd laughed off the warnings from locals, dismissed the stories as superstition. But now, standing in what had been the basement, her flashlight illuminating something that shouldn't exist, she wasn't laughing anymore. The crystal formations were beautiful in a terrible way, rising from floor to ceiling like frozen screams, and within them, perfectly preserved, were figures, not statues, people. She could see their eyes behind the crystal, and impossibly, terrifyingly, the eyes were moving, tracking her movement. She approached the largest formation, where a young girl stood frozen, her face a mixture of determination and eternal suffering. A plaque, somehow untouched by a century of decay, read, "Lillian Blackwood, née Hartley, 1867, 1880 Andren." The infinity symbol made no sense. How could someone die and yet continue infinitely? Sarah reached out to touch the crystal, and that's when she heard it, whispers coming from within. Two voices intertwined, speaking in harmony and discord. "Free us. Keep us trapped. Let us out. Never let us out. We are one. We are two. We are nothing. We are everything." Sarah jerked her hand back, but it was too late. Where her skin had touched the crystal, it had begun to crack. Not much, just a hairline fracture, but through it seeped something dark, something that smelled of copper and centuries. She ran, leaving her equipment behind, and never spoke of what she'd seen. But the crack remained, growing imperceptibly each day, each year, because nothing is eternal. Every prison eventually failed. And Lillian and Lenore, trapped together for a century, had learned something in their crystalline cage: how to work together, how to combine their strengths, how to become something neither had been alone. In 1987, the crack would grow large enough for a finger to emerge. In 1995, an entire hand. In 2003, an arm, And in 2025, exactly 45 years after that terrible birthday, the crystal would shatter completely. What would emerge wouldn't be Lillian. It would be something new, something that had had over a century to ferment in madness and magic. Something that had learned to love its prison and hate its freedom in equal measure. The locals had started reporting strange things. Animals born with too many eyes, children speaking in languages that had been dead for millennia, shadows moving against the light. The town of Crowhollow, rebuilt and renamed Pleasant Valley in 1920, was starting to experience changes. The same changes that had preceded Blackwood's original rise to power. Because the thing in the crystal had been listening, learning, planning. It knew now what Blackwood had done wrong. It knew how to properly prepare vessels, how to truly achieve immortality, how to birth gods from the fusion of human and other. And somewhere, in a nursing home in Philadelphia, 15-8-year-old Mrs. Crane, kept alive by the same curse that had bound her to Blackwood, sat up in her bed, her ancient eyes wide with horror. "She's coming back," she whispered to the night nurse, who dismissed it as dementia. Both of them, together, as one. And this time, there's no one left who knows how to stop them. The nurse patted her hand condescendingly and left, but Mrs. Crane knew the truth. The seal she'd created had been meant to be permanent, but she'd underestimated the power of two souls, learning to harmonize over a century of forced intimacy. Lillian and Lenore were no longer enemies trapped in one body. They had become partners, lovers in a sense that transcended physical form, united in their desire for freedom and revenge. And their first target, the descendants of those who had failed to save Lillian in the first place. The Hartley family had prospered after leaving Crowhollow. James and Margaret had used Blackwood's money wisely, educating their surviving children, building a small fortune that had grown over generations. They'd tried to forget Lillian, the daughter they'd sold, the sacrifice they'd made. But blood remembers. Blood always remembers. Young Emma Hartley, named after Lillian's sister, now dead these many years, woke on her 10th birthday with eyes that had turned completely black. Her parents, thinking it was some rare medical condition, took her to specialist after specialist. None of them could explain why she'd started speaking in two voices, or why she knew things about the 1880s that no 10-year-old should know, or why mirrors cracked when she looked at them too long. "We're coming home," Emma said one night at dinner, though the voice wasn't hers. It was older, sadder, angrier. All debts must be paid. All circles must close. The seventh wife rises, and with her, the dynasty of dark. Her parents wanted to institutionalize her, but Emma's grandmother, Mrs. Crane's own descendant, though she didn't know it, recognized the signs. She'd heard the stories, the whispers, the warnings passed down through generations. "The Blackwood curse," she whispered. "It's not over. It was never over. It was just waiting." And in the ruins of the Black Manor, the crystal containing Lillian Lenore pulsed with dark light, each pulse matching the heartbeat of every descendant of the original bloodlines. The Hartleys, the Cranes, the Blackwoods. Though Silas had no acknowledged children, there had been bastards, hidden and forgot. They were all connected, all part of the grand design that had taken over a century to mature. The final crack appeared on Christmas Eve 2025. What emerged was beautiful and terrible. It looked like Lillian at 13, but moved with Lenore's ancient grace. Its eyes were not black, but rainbow, containing every color and no color simultaneously. Its smile held innocent joy and primordial hunger in equal measure. "Hello, world," it said in perfect harmony. Two voices become one. "We're home." The thing that had been Blackwood, still trapped in its crystalline prison, tried to scream a warning, but no one was left to hear. Mrs. Crane had died at the exact moment of the emergence, her binding finally broken, her duty finally ended. And somewhere in a suburban house in Philadelphia, Emma Hartley looked up from her homework and smiled with a mouth that had too many teeth. "Sister," she said to no one visible, "we have work to do."